Jesselyn Cook, welcome to the Right About Now podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
What a great book you've written. It's just, I find it endlessly fascinating to find out about people who believe QAnon, but also just believe conspiracy theories in general. And I feel like even though you're talking specifically about QAnon in this book, it's really, talks about the kinds of people you meet who might join cults or just, fall down the rabbit holes of certain kind of belief systems. And I think all of us probably in our lives have met somebody like that. Your book is called The Quiet Damage because I think what we don't realize is, how much damage it does to the families. That's a story that isn't really told. We're told, what QAnon believes and all about all these crazy people and all this stuff, but we're not told, what's happening behind the scenes. And you discovered that story and have surfaced that story. So I really appreciate that. And you've done amazing reporting. I always like to start my interviews just talking a little bit, since I have a great writer on the other line, like your origin story as a writer. Like, when did you first knew you want to be a writer, and kind of how did you get into where you are now?
Oh, thank you so much. I really didn't know what I wanted to do growing up other than writing. I didn't know if I wanted to be a journalist or an author or write maybe fiction. I really didn't know. But when I was trying to figure that out in high school, I just applied to a bunch of different universities. I grew up in Canada. And yeah, journalism, I guess I kind of fell into this career, I guess by default. I was looking at all the different schools that I'd gotten into, and I felt like I got into journalism at Carleton University, which is a really good program. So that was kind of just what made the direction of my career path, was just deciding this is a good school, so I'll go. And at first, I really didn't like it. I didn't love the program. I felt it wasn't quite a good fit for me until I started doing some internships in my final year and got to actually go out and do reporting and talk to people. And that was kind of when I fell in love with it. And I definitely never thought I would write a book. Didn't really have any specific ambition to do that. But that's just where my career has taken me, kind of some weird twists and
Amazing.
turns. And
Well,
it
so
was a
after
great.
Carlton, what was your trajectory in terms of journalism?
So I did a summer reporting gig down in Southern Ontario at the Windsor Star, which was just a small local newspaper. Got to do some
By
interesting
the way, I
stories.
know Canada. I know Ontario because that cult that I mentioned was in Ontario. So anyway,
Oh,
we can
wow.
talk about that later. Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
So after I finished my time with the Star, I moved to New York City to write for the United Nations,
Oh,
writing for
cool.
UN Women. And that was a cool position. I got to meet a lot of really fascinating people, got to cover a lot of really cool stuff. And I spent 6 months there before going to HuffPost, where I spent 6 years, I think, as a
Wow.
journalist, or 5, 6 years. Um, and that was where I think I kind of found my niche. I found that I liked writing about extremism and weird parts of the internet and kind
Mm.
of technology's role in all of that. And then I went to NBC, and then I ended up writing this book. So a little bit
Yeah.
of zigging and zagging.
So the HuffPost, let's talk about that because it's really the story that you wrote for the Huffington Post that really obviously changed the trajectory of your life in a lot of ways. Can you tell us about what that story was and how it and what and what you learned?
Yeah. So early in the pandemic, August of 2020, I found myself at a QAnon rally, and I wasn't expecting it to be that
Not something
big.
you hear every day. I found myself at a QAnon rally.
Yeah, I had just moved to LA actually, and I heard that there was a QAnon rally happening in West Hollywood. Thought I'd check it out. It was on a Saturday, and it ended up being just so much bigger than I had anticipated. Because up until that point, QAnon was really seen as a fringe movement, kind of confined to the web. But I was just blown away at the families that had come out, at the size of the rally. There were hundreds of people, and just there were people from so many different walks of life, and there were a lot of children there. And I
Mm.
really started thinking more about that human side of mis and disinformation, not just about the impact on our politics, our democracy, even our public health, but kind of what it's like to It really got me thinking more about what goes on behind the scenes, and especially with these kids, like what are they hearing at home? What are they going to grow up believing? And so that eventually inspired me to start reporting on that side of things. So I wrote this article for HuffPost about the children of QAnon believers.
Mm.
I spoke to 9 of them, and it was really kind of devastating just to understand the lengths they were going to become self-taught deprogrammers, trying to teach their parents true from false, right from wrong. And it was just, I've done a lot of reporting on um, groups in difficult circumstances, vulnerable groups, but this was by far the most heartbreaking reporting of my career. And in response to this feature story I did for HuffPost, I ended up just hearing from hundreds of readers all over the country and far beyond who had similar stories of losing loved ones to extreme conspiracy theory belief, not just children, but spouses, aunts,
Mm.
uncles, siblings. And so that eventually kind of snowballed into my book.
Yeah. How did you even find the families of the QAnon? Like how, in your reporting, like that's probably hard to do. Like, did you find the people who believed in QAnon and said, "Hey, do you mind if I talk to your family?" Like, I'm just curious how you found those people.
So, in some cases, it was the families that reached out to me, the loved ones of the believers,
Mhm.
who had reached out to me in response to this article. That's how I found a couple of the
Yeah.
families featured in the book. But I also did meet a couple QAnon believers who became former believers, just by mostly searching around on Reddit. You kind of
Hmm.
Reddit's an interesting place to find different
Yeah. Beliefs. Yeah.
communities.
Like
Yeah, exactly.
subreddits. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it took a while to build trust with the people who spoke to me for the book. This stuff is really sensitive. There's a lot of mocking of QAnon believers
Hmm.
and a lot of, um, just anger toward them. And so it took some time to establish these relationships and get the really intimate level of detail that I was able to bring into the book. And I'm extremely grateful to everyone who spoke to me for this, because it took a lot of trust and a lot of courage to share that much
Yeah.
about some of the
And I
darkest.
want to get to that later, but about how you won that trust because you get unbelievably deep, um, emotions in your book, and people really opened up to you. I think it probably is helpful. I don't want this podcast to be what does QAnon believe because there's a million podcasts about that, but and a million articles you can read. But I mean, if people aren't really that familiar with it, if somehow it skipped by their radar, can you give us like a brief sketch of like the belief system of QAnon, like what its adherents believe?
Yeah, it has really transformed over time, but QAnon started out as this idea that Donald Trump and this mysterious government insider who only goes by Q and is otherwise anonymous, were taking on this grand secret battle to take down the so-called deep state, which is this cabal of evil elites across the highest ranks of society. So, like members of the royal family, members of our government, celebrities, people we know and trust who are rich and famous, are supposedly, according to the QAnon theory, all working together to better their own lives at our expense. So they are poisoning the skies with chemtrails. They are trafficking our children for sex. They are doing all kinds of just horrible and really vile things. A lot of these theories center children as victims of very
Mhm.
gruesome crimes. But really, the kind of extraordinary thing about QAnon is that every kind of conspiracy theory can be woven in. Any kind of evil that is being wrought is allegedly being done by this deep state. And so Donald Trump and Q, and then this online collective of people known as Anons, just everyday folks kind of signing on and following along, are working together to take on these evil elites. And it it has evolved over time to not be, it's been diluted, I guess I'll say. So these theories that were once viewed as very extreme and fringe and weird are now being mainstreamed and normalized, and you hear QAnon-esque theories coming from some of our elected leaders. And so
Right.
it's been kind of extraordinary to watch this transition from the fringes to very much front and center of our politics.
So QAnon is new, but these theories are not new, right? Like I remember some people talking about a guy named David Icke, who was like the original conspiracy. Well, he's not the original. He was a popular conspiracy theorist out of England in the 80s, and he believed a lot of these beliefs. There was like that powerful people were drinking children's blood, that reptiles lived in the center of the earth and were among us, etc. So it always kind of comes back, it resurfaced, but it's not new. But I think what's different about QAnon, you think?
QAnon just kind of was a thread that tied all of these different beliefs together. And it also, I think part of what made it so successful is that part of the narrative is that there is this happy ending that people are working toward. A lot of conspiracy
Mm-hmm.
theories, there's just this ominous evil and there's no real solution. But with QAnon, part of the theory is the Great Awakening or the storm. We're going to have
Mm-hmm.
this day of reckoning where all the bad guys are going to be hauled out into the streets and either executed or taken to Gitmo, and they're going to face justice and society will be better. So that's part of
Yeah,
it. And QAnon
just
has
like
also kind of evolved with social media, as social media has kind of made it that much easier for people to access and spread information. It has really thrived in spreading its falsehoods and filling these information voids with delusions. And so the conditions for QAnon to evolve were really perfect leading into COVID. And that's, I think, why we saw it become the giant that it is today.
why do you think they latched on to Donald Trump as their avatar and leader? Because he's so clearly, it's so easy for us to step back and be objective and be like, this is insane, right? But I mean, he's so clearly like everything. I don't know, whether you like Trump or not, like he's not, I mean, he's so clearly part of, you know, the elite in this country. I'm a New Yorker, so I've grown up having to hear about Trump for years, but he is not a part, like it's a funny person for them to make as a leader of a fringe movement like this. He's very much part of the deep state in some ways.
Right. Yeah, it has been kind of remarkable to see that. And even before QAnon, which started kind of percolating online in fall of 2017, Trump really effectively latched onto this message of pitchfork populism and kind of like painted himself as like one of us and just this everyday guy who's going to stand up and fight for what's right. He says he's not a politician. He's just a member of society who, at his own expense, wants to make life better for everyone else.
Yeah.
And so that, I mean, his kind of messaging aligned very neatly with what QAnon would go on to claim. But it is one of the kind of glaring ironies in all of this is absolutely Donald Trump is exactly the kind of person that QAnon claims is so evil and is
Right.
like wreaking all this
It's
havoc.
I guess it's called projection. It's like, I mean, it's the same way the evangelicals have made him into some sort of Jesus like figure when, we all kind of know it's well documented the sins that it's just funny that he's created, that he's considered to be like some sort of pure. I think people project a lot onto him of what
Absolutely.
they want him to be. All right. So, when we're hearing about this, even as we talk about this, I think we're both kind of smiling, almost like shaking our heads, like they believe this in, which, empirically, insane, what seems just completely incorrect information that can be debunked in many, many different ways, but they believe it so fully. And I think there's a temptation for people to think of people that would follow a teaching like this, or a philosophy or whatever you call it, like this conspiracy theories, to be dumb, right? To be like not educated, like high school educated or whatever, maybe not even finished high school, and just like, living in a trailer park, like all the kind of cliches that we have about the kinds of people that might follow this kind of teaching. And yet, what always has surprised me, and it surprised me in my background too, having grown up among people who believed in a lot of conspiracy theories, is that they're a lot smarter and more educated and more normal than you think, right? Did that surprise you too?
It did. I think there's a really easy assumption that you have to be stupid or crazy to fall for these extreme conspiracy theories because they seem so irrational. But what I found through my reporting, just again and again, and even, I profile 5 families in this book, but I spoke to hundreds over the past
Mm-hmm.
3 years while working on this. And it's not just dumb people who get into
Yeah.
this. The path into conspiracy theories really is not your IQ just isn't relevant. For so many people, it's not really about the who, it's about the when. There's no single profile of someone who's susceptible to this stuff. It's more when in their life they intersect with these theories. And so often it seems to come down to a circumstantial vulnerability. You know, when someone is not feeling entirely fulfilled in their life, maybe they are seeking a sense of belonging or purpose or meaning or
Mm.
community or hope. And in a weird way, conspiracy theories can satisfy that very deeply, similar to the way that other vices may make people feel better, like gambling or drugs or other addictions. Conspiracy theories can give people a sense of fulfillment similar almost to that of more traditional activism. You know, some people are standing up for the environment against big oil or whatever it may be. It gives them something that pulls them from bed every morning. And with QAnon, you can feel like you're a digital soldier in this very important battle to save humanity. It makes you feel like you're part of something that's greater than yourself. And so it also comes with, you know, a big community that's there and supporting you, and you feel like you're kind of in possession of this secret knowledge that makes you smarter than everyone else. So there's all this kind of allure that really it can feel more precious to someone, more powerful to someone than the truth. And so you can see how these emotions can really overpower people's critical thinking skills.
And you say they're not even really interested in the truth. Like, not really. Because at a certain point, you get so wrapped up into it that, like you said, it gives you a sense of purpose in your life. It becomes so much a part of your identity, even your social circle, that the truth sort of is like, that becomes, maybe you got into it because you were sort of seeking out some answers, but it's not really what it ends up being.
Exactly. A lot of the times, especially when I'm talking to family members, they'll say, like, I will show my QAnon believing loved one
Yeah.
irrefutable evidence, and they will just turn away from it. Like, they can't absorb it. And I think in the people I profiled as well, you'll hear people reflect on this saying, you know, there was a voice in my head that said, like, this isn't true. I'm being duped. But it felt better to cling to these convictions and to keep believing because they're serving these unmet needs that are so deeply important to us. And so I think what you mentioned, like how it's not really about truth, this is why trying to fix the problem or trying to um, de-radicalize someone by debunking their delusions and fact checking these false
Yeah.
claims, it's just not power, it's not effective, because at the end of the day, this isn't about truth. This is about a deeper issue that conspiracy theories are satisfying. So it's more effective to identify and address that problem rather than try to debunk someone out of their beliefs.
Yeah. I mean, it's the media. Us in the media have still have not learned this lesson in the last 8 years. Like, you know, not to keep on bringing up Donald Trump, but for some reason he's so tied to this topic. The way to kind of, at least in the beginning, the way the media tried to combat somebody like a Donald Trump is kept trying to call him out on his lies and trying to like fact check him in real time. And it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter. And that's what's, I think, very frustrating for people who are coming from a rational kind of well reasoned place, is to try to reason with people who are not being reasonable. Right. It's one of the mistakes that we make, or make. That's one mistake. And the other mistake we make is to make fun of them.
Mm-hmm.
But let's first talk about the first one, where it's like deep. That is not, I mean, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, like how to turn people's mind around, or how, if you have a loved one who, but one of the things, one of the no's is to try to say, well, that's not true. That's ridiculous. Right. It's like the worst thing you
Yeah.
can do. Like, shame them. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a journalist named David Roberts who coined the term tribal epistemology, and it's basically kind of explains why what you were speaking about, like how, say, even just Trump supporters, not necessarily like extreme conspiracy theorists, but people will believe whatever Trump tells them. Like Trump's recent
Mhm.
claim that Kamala Harris's rally was had no one show up, and all the pictures we
Right.
saw and the videos we saw were just AI generated. Like, there are people who it doesn't matter if you show them concrete
Right.
evidence, you fact check their claims, whatever Trump says, they're going to believe it. And for people like that, being part of the tribe, being a Trump supporter, or belonging to this
Right.
community is more
More
important than
important.
the truth, because it's part of their identity. It's become part of who they are. And you can't pierce that bubble with facts
Yeah.
and
With
evidence.
facts, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about some of the people, because first of all, I'm curious why you chose, you said hundreds of people. Why did you choose the four people that you decided to profile in the book? Like, what was it about their stories that made them book worthy?
I wanted to show a lot of different paths into conspiracy theories. I think we have seen that people can get sucked in through social media algorithms, but I wanted to choose people. I chose five families for this book, and they come from very different backgrounds, and they kind of defy the conspiracy, or sorry, they defy the stereotype of,
Stereotype.
I think, the maybe conservative white boomer is what a lot of people think of when we think of conspiracy theorists. And so
Yeah.
in the book, we have people across generations, across different races. We have a wealthy white lawyer who's extremely educated. We have an impoverished Black mother who's come from extreme hardship. We have a child as young as 7, tragically. We have an elderly couple in their late 70s, early 80s, and even a former Bernie Sanders supporter and a Donald Trump supporter. So people from entirely different walks of life.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to capture in these very different stories was how these different needs pulled all of them from their different backgrounds to the same destination of clinging to conspiracy theories, and also to show not only different paths in, but different paths out. We do see some success stories and some hope.
Yeah. It's not all bad news.
Yeah.
Um, let's talk about Alice for a minute, because you mentioned she was the Bernie Sanders supporter, right?
Yes.
And Alice goes down the rabbit hole. I had to say that. She could thank you, but she does go down the rabbit hole. Can you tell us a little bit about her story? Like, how did she get sucked into the QAnon stuff?
Yeah, there were a few factors for her, but I guess what makes sense to explain is why she was drawn to Bernie Sanders, because it was, in a
Yeah.
weird way, a very similar parallel with QAnon. She looked at Bernie as a savior. She saw the world and she was not happy. She saw this corruption and poverty and despair, and she thought Bernie Sanders was going to come in and make it a better place. He was going to be an advocate for the people, take down this profits over people governance model. And when he lost, she lost her hope, and she just desperately wanted this better world for her son. And then, in a weird way, QAnon gave her hope back to her. It promised her this great awakening, this storm that would sweep out corruption and bring prosperity to all. And so, part of the allure for her was just clinging to this hope for a better world, because
Mhm.
QAnon very convincingly makes that promise. And it's also worth noting she came across QAnon early in the pandemic when she was, you know, I think we look back now and we don't view COVID with the urgency that we all felt when it began. But at the beginning, she was terrified. She has like elderly parents. She thought they were going to die. She didn't know if the virus would have long-term effects for people who survived. It was very scary. So she was in this
Mhm.
very vulnerable state, and QAnon, as everyone was taking, like, just confused and trying to understand what was happening in the world, and we were waiting for answers as people are studying this mutating virus that's never been seen before in humans. QAnon swept in and provided answers where there were none to be found, and
Right.
that was really where it started to blossom. And Alice was just all in. She desperately wanted to know what was going on, and she wanted to have reassurance, and QAnon gave that to her. But it also, she's someone who, community is so, so, so important to her. It has been that way since she's very little. And as she got deeper into QAnon, her community, this very progressive Bernie Sanders community in the Bay Area, they really started turning away from her in disgust. They thought that QAnon was horrible, this far right movement. They wanted nothing to do with her. And so as her community turned away from her, she really, really planted her roots deep in QAnon because there was this new community that was accepting her, and that was so important. And that was what made it
Mhm.
hard for her to get out ultimately.
And what's the effect on her family, her boyfriend, like the immediate, like what ends up happening? Like, are
A lot of her friendships were badly damaged. People would reach out to her and say they were disgusted by her. They couldn't believe she would ever do this. But her fiance and her father refused to give up on her. And that was really, a lot of people who go down these rabbit holes are not fortunate enough to have loved ones who just will not turn away from them. They end up burning all their bridges. But in Alice's case, her fiance and her dad really worked together to stay by her side, to try to keep her tethered to reality, and to ultimately, gradually pull her back out and kind of guide her towards seeing the havoc she was wreaking on her own life and kind of trying to re-stimulate some of her critical thinking skills and to recognize what it was about QAnon that was really appealing to her. They kind of made her see that this wasn't actually, none of these claims were adding up, but they were able to help her recognize that she just wanted to feel certainty. She just wanted to know things were going to be okay. And QAnon was just satisfying those needs for her.
Right. And let's dig in a little deeper into like some of the strategies used. Now, obviously there's not one like cure all strategy, and everybody has different situations. And like in your book, there's certain people that don't are still QAnon believers and are not, unfortunately it's really tragic. In their case, it helped, yes, that she had this support system of two people who loved her very much and weren't willing to, but she was like adamant, especially with her fiance, of like showing him the latest YouTube video that she just saw that proves like it was so important for her, it seems like, to get him to acknowledge that she wasn't crazy, that there really was a threat. And it was maddening for him because he was actually even in some cases looked up like some of the claims. Like apparently there was a video of Bill Gates that he showed her from an interview where he's claiming something that all the QAnon believers. But then when you actually look at the context, it's actually not at all what he said. There's a I think you said there was a video from the Pope where he's like saying, he's like a translation. He's saying these incredibly inflammatory things. It turns out it's not the real translation from the Italian. So he kept debunking it, but of course that didn't really work. But but one thing that he does do is he sets boundaries, right? Talk about that. I think part of it is like one thing to do is to set boundaries, like because if you've ever known somebody who knows a conspiracy theory, like they can't stop. It's like all they want to talk about. And all they want to do is show you fact after fact after fact after fact after fact. And if you give them one fact, then they're going to give you a counter fact that they found somewhere on the internet. It's like, it's so exhausting. So the boundaries thing seemed to work.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And yes, Alice, it was her now husband, then fiance, describes it as almost a manic energy. She just could not stop trying to bring him every piece of QAnon content constantly. And he's still working full time at this point, and it's just overwhelming. He can't keep up. And so, what he eventually does at the recommendation of his therapist is limits their conspiracy theory discussion to one night a week, which at first really frustrates Alice. She can't understand why he's trying to stifle her and limit her. But eventually, she recognizes that in this one evening a week, rather than talking at him and him just being annoyed and not wanting to engage, he's completely giving her his focus. And so she really appreciates that. It feels really exciting to have him care and show an interest. And so she starts using this once a week time very carefully, and she becomes very selective of what she wants to show him every, whatever it was, Tuesday night. And this does a few things. It at first,
You went on Tuesdays. Yeah,
right. Not just showing him the craziest stuff she's finding online, she's showing him the stuff that she thinks will be most compelling to him. And so that becomes some of the less extreme stuff, maybe not like the baby eating level, but the more digestible end of the spectrum. So maybe more about COVID and masks and whatever it may be. So she's already starting to kind of come back toward reality, a bit further away from the fringes. And she's anticipating that on this once a week sit down they have, he will kind of look through this content and kind of start asking questions about it, maybe thoughtfully, but compassionately, trying to poke some holes and look for inconsistencies. And so to make the best use of this time that she has, she starts trying to pre-bunk them, which is interesting. She starts kind of finding these little holes herself and getting a little confused. And so it does re-stimulate her critical thinking skills a little bit. And this unexpected turn of just having these boundaries really does do a lot to have her kind of think more deeply about the content she's consuming and sharing, and being a little more skeptical herself. And so that was an unexpected outcome. Her therapist didn't know what happened. Her fiance didn't know what happened, but it does make a difference in her story.
Yeah. What are some other techniques? I mean, one of the things, like we said, you can't do, and oftentimes it'll just be a one encounter you'll have, like maybe with a hairstyle. So we'll say like, Jeffrey Epstein was, in cahoots with the CIA, or, whatever. Like you'll hear, though, somebody will say something, you'll be like, what? And you could be, and how do you, I mean, one thing it seems like, don't engage, like, kind of, because you're not going to convince somebody in a short conversation like that's crazy, because then they're going to be like, what was the thing they used to say a lot of, the facts, like, do your research. That was the thing. Do
Mhm.
your research. That's like their so okay. So don't engage. Maybe be more, listen compassionately, set boundaries. Know that probably this conspiracy theory that they believe in is not necessarily, it's coming from a different place. It's coming from a sense of wanting to belong, or a sense of wanting to make a change. Is there anything else that you found that was kind of effective?
Yeah, I think definitely not criticizing or ridiculing. And I understand that can be like the obvious impulse. Someone says something
Right.
ridiculous, you want to ridicule it. But that
Yeah.
really can kind of have a backwards effect. I have not, in any of the conversations I've had, I've never seen or heard of an effective attempt to shame someone out of their
Yeah.
beliefs. It kind of just gets them to dig their heels in deeper. But another approach that Alice's loved ones used on her was called motivational interviewing. The idea is just trying to give her the motivation to want to step away herself. But what her father did was, rather than focus on the true and the false and trying to debate any of that, or even like gently, thoughtfully pick it apart, he just kind of said, it doesn't matter. Like, maybe it's true, maybe it's false, but what is apparent without a doubt is what this is doing to your life. Like,
Mm.
look at what's happened. Look at your life before QAnon. Look at your life now. What do you see? You see a lot of devastated friendships. You see a lot of anxiety and sadness and fear and shame. And it's been embarrassing. It's been painful to you. And even if there is this great awakening that QAnon is promising to bring, does it really matter if you
Yeah. Is it
are?
worth it?
Is it worth it? Are you really making a difference every day posting on Facebook? Or can we just say, maybe it's true, maybe it's false, but my involvement is only harming me? And so, can you, his father, or her father rather, kept asking, can you just take an assessment of what this has done to you? And when she did eventually take stock and kind of look at all the harm it had caused, she was able to take a step back. And even before she recognized that all of this was false, she was just able to pause and say, like, I'm going to spend some time just focusing on me, and I'm going to go plant a garden, and I'm going to try to spend some time offline and not be as involved in politics. And taking that step back, even though it didn't necessarily prove anything false to her, was a huge deal that really helped her disengage and disentangle herself from this web.
Yeah. Not to be too depressing, but can you tell us maybe one of the stories where it didn't have so much of a happy ending, or it's still ongoing?
Yeah. So some of the paths out in the book don't necessarily mean getting out of the rabbit hole for the believer, but it's more a path out for the loved ones. And in some
Hmm.
cases, in many cases actually, it's just not worth it to cling to this person. And so in the case of Emily, she's the very wealthy, privileged white lawyer. She has
Hmm.
three children who are just gobsmacked to see her turn to QAnon because she's brilliant. She's
Hmm.
just a decent, good woman. She actually grew up very progressive and raised them all to be progressive. And then she spirals into QAnon, kind of by way of Fox News, which is also disturbing to them. And for Adam, her youngest child, he is so desperate to pull her back to reality, turn her into the mother he used to know. The children have lost their dad already to suicide, and so they feel like they're losing the only parent they have left. And Adam does immense damage to his own life just trying to drag her out of the rabbit hole because he just can't let her go. And the more he tries to pull her out, the further in he seems to push her, and it's just excruciating to him. And his sisters are able to kind of take a step back and say, I'm not doing this. It's too painful. It's causing too much harm to my own life. I'm going to mourn you as dead. And so they basically just decide that Emily is beyond saving, and they step away, and they're able to reach some level of healing. But Adam clings on so long that he really, he isolates himself from his friends. He's falling behind at work. He's really suffering. And so it doesn't have a happy ending. He doesn't successfully pull Emily back to reality. He just really goes through the ringer himself and then kind of finds himself on a really difficult edge. He's kind of contemplating suicide. He's in a really bad place, and he eventually decides to break away from her. And so, it's painful, but this is a story I've heard again and again in my reporting. It's just, I can't give enough of myself to try to save this person. I need to move on.
Yeah. Families are definitely the first casualties of these kind of true believers who, you know, basically they feel like they need to sever ties with the people closest to them, um, because, it's really sad. It seems like you can sort of objectively identify when a conspiracy theory when it's something as a conspiracy theory that is not healthy. Um, and one of the traits that always comes to me is that you know basically when a conspiracy theory says they have the answers to everything, like this is the answer, like the absolute answer to all the world's trouble is going, that is definitely one red flag. Like there's a lot of red flags, right? Um, and I think we're starting to know more about these red flags, like as we kind of learn more about how to deal with these people. That's one. When you give people, anytime that somebody's getting information where they think they have sort of inside information that nobody else has, that seems to be another red flag. Like it's not in the mainstream media, therefore it's valid because I know this secret thing that nobody else knows. And look, in my experience, because I was raised um, in a what I call a cult. There's some debate in my family about whether it was a cult or not. I know because even when I was sort of agreeing with a lot of the things that the teaching was saying, I remember the feeling of feeling like, oh, these outsiders, if only they knew what I knew, they would feel differently, right? Like and I'm a smart, educated, college educated person, and I even believed that stuff. And not only did I believe that, but I also believed if I were to turn my back on this, very bad things would befall me. This is a little different than QAnon, but like that it's almost like a superstitious belief that if I were to not follow this teaching or kind of turn my back on what I believed, then bad things would happen to me. Like my karma would be bad. But I think in QAnon, I think maybe their feeling is if I were to if I were to just basically say that none of this is true, it negates everything that I've stood for and believed for so long. It's almost humiliating, right? Like to just basically say like I devoted my life to this thing for 10 years, but it's actually completely all false and a lie. Like I think that's a really hard pill to swallow.
It really is. And I think that's what holds a lot of people in these kinds of movements, even after, the storm fails to appear. QAnon, there have been so many dates when this big showdown was supposed to happen and it didn't, and people still remain just firmly planted in this belief system. Even Trump losing in 2020 was not supposed to happen. And you see these people digging
Right.
in deeper. And there is kind of that thinking that goes through your head of, look at what I've done. Look at what I've demolished my
Right.
friendships. My loved ones have turned away from me. There are lots of people who have invested a lot of money into scams. There are QAnon grifters who scammed one guy in my book out of basically his and his wife's entire life savings because they said that there was going to be a financial collapse, and instead of money everyone would need silver and gold for bartering, so he spent all their money on silver and gold coins. And it's like, once you've reached that stage of things, once you've broken your family and you've lost your money and you've maybe sacrificed your dignity, how can you let go? It's the sunk cost fallacy. You've invested so much. How can you? It has to be true. It has to be true. You can't let go of that hope, or else it was all for nothing. And that can just be too much to handle for some people. So you just keep waiting and hoping and praying.
Yeah. How did you, as a reporter, how did you get people, especially the anons, how did you get them to open up to you about this? I mean, maybe it's not as hard because they love to talk to people who will listen to them about their crazy beliefs, but to get to the deeper stuff, like beyond just their belief system, like how did you go there? How did you get them? How did you win their trust?
I think when you're spending time on these QAnon type forums or in these online QAnon populated spaces, the media and the other so called elites are just painted as evil and nasty and just not human, right? Like they're completely
Mm-hmm.
dehumanized. But when you meet someone and you have a conversation, and I talk to a lot of people at rallies, and I faced a lot of hostility at first, which I was
Yeah.
expecting. But once you kind of get into a conversation, it's, you recognize that I am human. I am a person. I do have compassion, and I am wanting to listen. And it a lot of times what I would hear once I kind of started having a productive conversation with a QAnon believer was like, well, maybe you're not one of the bad guys, but you're
Hmm.
complicit in this through your ignorance. You don't realize that your bosses are part of the deep state, or that you're like a cog in this machine. You just don't get it, but you are contributing to it. And the other thing is, QAnon believers, as a result of their beliefs, in many cases, don't have a lot of people to talk to, not in person. Online, sure, but some of them are very lonely. And I think having someone to talk to, even if it was me and they were just lecturing me about how everything I stand for is wrong and backwards and whatever it may be, sometimes I would have to go and the phone calls would keep going. And it's just, I know I could sense that they just wanted someone to talk to. And that was really sad. And that's also
Yeah.
part of the human wreckage caused by this.
Did you, was there ever a moment when you were like, hmm, maybe this philosophy isn't all bad? I mean, one of the things that conspiracy theories trade in is that there's always like a grain of truth in the things that they say, or there's something that they can point to that's true. Like you mentioned, I think in your book, or maybe it was an interview I heard with you where you said like, Jeffrey Epstein, like that was a real thing, right? But all the conspiracy theories that have come out of the Jeffrey Epstein scandal are, conspiracy theories. So did you ever like, did somebody ever almost convince you like, maybe I should go and check that? Like that does sound like it could be legit.
Well, not any of the core QAnon beliefs. There was never a time when I
Right.
was kind of like weighing those. But I think as the place where it gets really murky is sorry, I think my husband and son just came back in, but they're not supposed to be.
Oh,
But I'm so sorry. Anyway, if they get loud, I'll
it's all good.
tell them to go. But
They're not loud. They're not loud.
I think where it gets murky is especially with health mis and disinformation. There is so much valid mistrust in
Mm,
the, some of
yeah.
our pharmaceutical giants. Like you look at the opioid crisis, there was so much deceit that went on, and so much human suffering and loss as a result of that. And, there are uncomfortable relationships, cozy relationships in some cases, between our regulatory bodies and these big corporations that make a lot of money. And so, you can see how real fear and real desperation, people who are facing different diseases, people who have loved ones that are very ill, can be sold snake oil and lies, and kind of have real corruption distorted into this idea that the entire medical system is corrupt. And, even with vaccines, I think there's a tendency to shame and laugh at people who are anti vaxxers without, in some cases, like empathy and trying to understand where is this fear coming from. Like, even, the Black population in America has faced racist medical experiments by the government throughout
Right.
our history. There's so much reason for like valid distrust. And so, some of the um, things that would be brought to me when conspiracy theorists were trying to prove to me their medical misinformation claims, like a lot of them would bring me these real studies and these real examples of harm caused by medical establishments that we should trust. And so I get it. And I could really deeply understand how their fear had evolved into this extreme idea of, maybe like vaccines being poisonous, or bioweapons, or whatever level of
Yeah.
the conspiracy theory they landed at.
Yeah. Um, is QAnon still a thing? Like, it was such a news story. It was like, in the 2000, in the 220 and during the election. And then it kind of like, there was the shaman and all that stuff. But then it kind of like, it left the headlines, but is it still like alive and well and thriving?
Not with the same branding. Q has gone dark. Q used to post these little like nuggets of so-called intel
Right.
on online for followers, and Q hasn't posted in quite some time now. But when Q was still posting, one of the final messages was, you know, don't call us QAnon anymore. Don't speak of Q. Don't speak of Anons. It I think there was an understanding that the branding was starting to hurt the messaging,
Mhm.
because QAnon became a household name and it was not a good one. And so I think a lot of these ideas have kind of, yes, shed their branding and started being diluted and spread in more ominous, less obvious ways. And that really has just made it more effective. And that is
Yeah,
how you're
scares
seeing
me.
it, not just in the fringes, but coming from people who really shouldn't be spreading that stuff, people we trust and
Right.
respect and elect.
Congress people.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Is there a code? Like, is there something we should be on the lookout for? Like, I remember the first time I found out about QAnon, it was like, I think it was like at a Trump rally and people were wearing Q shirts and people, and all of a sudden it was like, what's this thing? And it probably had been around for a while, but that was the first time it had kind of like come a little bit it came to my attention that there was like this conspiracy theory. Is there one that's kind of circulating now that has a name that we should be aware of?
I mean, I don't think there's any kind of uh, new movement or even like disguise for QAnon. I think a lot of people who spread these kinds of ideas don't even necessarily understand that it came from QAnon. And so there are still people who consider themselves anons and who had like followed Q drops and now are just continuing on. But I think they've managed to pull in a lot more people, or just the spread of these conspiracy theories has ensnared a lot more people who would never have associated openly or otherwise with QAnon. And it's hard to even look at it as a movement anymore. It just kind of feels like a condition, like the
Part
overton.
of society.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes it hard to even really know how to talk about it. But it just it feels like the horse has left the barn, and it's just kind of everywhere now.
Yeah. I mean, there's the things that give me hope. Uh, well, first of all, what doesn't give me hope is that obviously the internet is the culprit here. I think is the main culprit of why it spread so rapidly. The social media and the internet, YouTube, et cetera, because it used to be these conspiracy, like John Birch Society type people. It was kind of a fringe thing, and you needed to find your people, and it would be hard. But now it's so easy to form communities and to find people who will 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 believe these things and spread these lies. And there's a lot of really bad actors, which we didn't even talk about in the QAnon movement, that profit off of converting people, et cetera. So, but what gives me hope is that story you told about when people met you, they start realizing, oh, well, you're actually normal. You're a journalist, but you're actually cool. And I feel like it's the human contact that we have that actually makes it okay. Because once we actually meet each other and really sit down with each other, and it's very cliche to let's have a conversation, but like actually, like when you meet somebody, um, including me meeting somebody from QAnon, like I might find some similarities, of things we believe. Obviously, we're a human connection. I feel like that is that makes me feel a little bit better. I don't know what the solution is, but I just know that as humans, we actually have a lot more in common than we have differences. You know?
Yeah, I think, yeah, behind our screens, it's really easy to dehumanize people and to see them as less than human, and to just kind of, this tribalism really thrives because we don't have to have any understanding of who it is we're dealing with or who it is we're criticizing, or, in the QAnon kind of sphere of things, like it's really easy to just call a stranger a pedophile because they disagree with something that you posted.
Yeah.
That seems to be like just a go-to, which is really bleak. But face to face, that's just not, it's so much harder to do that. And even
Right.
there's a moment in my book where Matt, one of these QAnon believing characters, kind of has a moment of human interaction that loosens his conspiracy theories hold over him, because he learns that he's thought for so long that COVID isn't real. It's just this deep state myth, and it's being used to kind of give the government more control over people. But then he sees this man who's completely consumed by grief at having almost lost his wife to COVID. And to Matt, that's like, it speaks to him. He
Yeah.
can't fake that kind of emotion. He sees it. He understands this is real pain. Someone almost died from this disease that he didn't think was real. And so, it it's hard because we're getting more and more online, so maybe that doesn't inspire hope. But I think there's wisdom.
More and more online, but we're starting to kind of understand a little bit more about that. Some things are like everybody was so nervous about deepfakes. I feel like yes, deepfakes are scary, but I also think people are very hyper aware of AI now, and so I don't know. Maybe I'm just a, a stupid optimist, but I feel like there is hope. I hope that the family is that the lost their loved ones, QAnon, that there's a resolution there. It could be years away, but there may be a resolution there. You mentioned that you liked that your beat was like writing about people who the extremes of society. Is that still your kind of path as far as your interests as a writer and a journalist?
I guess I'm trying to figure that out. So right now, I'm starting a year at Harvard to kind of step away from the reporting side of things and do a little more academic work and do some research. And it's still through
Are
it.
you a student there or are you a professor?
I'm a Neiman Fellow, so it's a journalism foundation that
Oh,
brings
wow.
journalists to Harvard to spend a
How
year kind
cool.
of studying an issue. And I am going to continue to study mis and disinformation, specifically as it relates to children and their online spaces. But I won't
Hmm.
be necessarily out doing the same kind of reporting. And I'm grateful to have a bit of a breather from that because the 3 years I spent on this book was just a lot of very heavy stuff, a lot of very
3
traumatic.
years.
Yeah.
That is intense.
Yeah. So,
God bless you. My goodness. Well, the book is called The Quiet Damage. It is really a good read and sad, but also really engrossing and revelatory. And I'm so glad you wrote it. Somebody had to write that book, and I'm really happy that you did. And you're a wonderful reporter and great writer. So, Jesselyn Cook, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about your book.
thank you so much for having me.
All right. Yay, Canada.
So sorry about all the noise. I hope that wasn't
Oh my God, I didn't hear it at all. It's
okay.
okay.
Good.
Where in did you grow up in Ontario?
The Toronto area.
Oh God. This is like my nightmare. Did you grow up near Palgrave, Ontario? Do you know where that is? Or Bolton, Ontario?
I don't. I grew up near Markham, Ontario, if you know that.
Okay. It's northern Ontario. It's a little bit
Okay.
north of Toronto.
Okay. Got it.
Anyway. Yeah, someday I want to write a book about that cult, but it's really hard for me because my family is still my brother and my mother are still kind of believers in it, even though the guru long died a long time ago. So
Wow.
it's tricky. But it is like it's intense. Do you write about cults?
I mean, I did definitely do some. I spoke to some cult members through the process of reporting, but I'm really curious about them, and yeah, that's. I didn't even know that there
Yeah.
was a cult in Ontario, so it's really
Yeah, I'll
yeah.
send you a
Please
link if
do.
you want to write about it. All right, Jesselyn, thank you so much. This is great.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
And good luck with your year at Harvard.
Thank you. I appreciate it.